Welcome, friends. We're going to get started right at noon. If someone from the audience could let me know that they see me, hear me, and see our screen, that would be helpful. In the chat box, you'll also find a link to today's document and intro, and it will have information that might come up as we talk, as Zach talks, and links to reading lists and other good info. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and we welcome you to the unceded land of the Ohlone tribal people and acknowledge the many Ramaytush Ohlone tribal groups as the rightful stewards in the lands in which we work and reside here in the San Francisco Bay Area. SFPL encourages you to learn more about Native culture and land rights, and we do this by sharing all of our factual and useful and library information. In the chat box, I put a link to a map called Native Lands, and you can type anywhere in the world that you are at, and it'll let you know what native land you are residing on. And it's pretty interesting. It also lists the treaties that were there and in place before and currently. I'm Anissa Milady. I am your librarian host today, and we really appreciate you joining us for a lunchtime author talk. We've been really enjoying these noon times. Like I said, there'll be a doc, has all the information coming up, and I'm just going to breeze through some of this information. I also want to acknowledge that San Francisco Public Library is not a neutral institution and stands behind Black Lives Matter and ending systemic racism and police brutality and killings. And same thing, we do this by participating in looking at our own racial equity plans, as well as providing useful and factual information to our community. And that is also in all those docs. There's some great reading lists on that. The census is not over. Despite what you're hearing, it is not over. It's an act of resistance and an act of activism to take your census. I know it can be scary, and I know it's part of our government system, and that it's not exactly the best effective way of what we do, but it does bring funding for crucial services to our community. So please take your census, and it's not over. Tell everyone to tell everyone. Beautiful student art reminding us to vote. Last day to register online is October 19th. We are celebrating Viva, lots of amazing Viva events coming up. I've been starstruck the whole time by the presenters. And you can check out the full range of events at sfpl.org/viva. Poetry, art. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We will be partnering with La Casa to talk about domestic violence during pandemic and how our communities can help people in need and what we can do. And I'm really hoping it's gonna be useful, factual, and tools that we'll be able to take out with us when we leave that event. Amazing events, like I said, before Columbus Award coming up. Can't wait for that. It's gonna be a good one. And I'm going to go really fast right here. What? Angela Davis? I can't even believe it. A conversation with Isaac Julian, Angela Davis, and it's going to be moderated by Sarah Lewis. And it's talking about Isaac Julian's exhibit, Frederick Douglass in particular, and how we can apply those views now. Our 16th One City, One Book, Chanel Miller. Pick it up today at your Friends of the Library online bookstore or any of your local bookstores. Get it now. It's a heavy read. And this will be taking place in mid-March. We'll have Chanel in a virtual author talk. So get your book now. Take your senses. SFPL to go at 6 locations, 3 more opening up. Oh, they opened up already. So 9 locations. And we also have some mobile spots. And a reminder, all of my library family out there, I miss you, I love you. And please wear masks to help protect my library family and all city workers and community service workers and people serving us on a daily basis out in the streets. It's about them. All right, and today I'm so excited to have, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and introduce Zach. So today here we have Zach Norris. And Zach, we're going to be talking and celebrating his book, We Keep Us Safe, Building Secure, Just, and Inclusive Communities. And one reason I asked Zach to come talk to us is, I don't know if many of you know, but San Francisco Public Library has a jail and reentry services department. And so I feel pretty passionate. I think our library feels pretty passionate about serving and helping folks get back into communities where they belong and doing the best for them so they don't go back. And reentry is a big part of that department. Zach is the executive director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, the co-founder of Restore Oakland, a community advocacy and training center that empowers Bay Area community members to transform local economic and justice systems and make a safe and secure future possible for themselves and their families. He is also the co-founder of Justice for Families, a national alliance of family-driven organizations working to end our nation's youth incarceration epidemic. Zach helped build California's first statewide network for families of incarcerated youth, which led to the effort to close 5 youth prisons in the state. Congratulations, great job. He also helped pass legislation to enable families to stay in contact with their loved ones and defeated Prop 6, a destructive and ineffective criminal justice ballot measure. In addition to being a Harvard grad and an NYU educated attorney, Zach is also a graduate of the Labor Community Strategy Center's National School for Strategic Organizing in Los Angeles and was the 2011 Soros Justice Fellow. He's a former board member of the Witness for Peace, Just Cause Oakland, and Justice for Families. Zach was a recipient of the American Constitution Society's David Carlinier Public Interest Award in 2015, and is a member of the 2016 class of Levi Strauss Foundation Pioneers of Justice. He's also a loving husband, dedicated father of 2 bright daughters, whom he's raising in his hometown of Oakland. And just a quick note about the Ella Baker Center. The Ella Baker Center is located in Oakland and works locally and statewide and nationally to shift resources away from prisons and punishment and towards opportunity that makes communities safe, healthy, and strong. And all of these links and all of information about those orgs are in the link that I sent you there in the doc. And we're talking about Zach's book today, We Keep Us Safe, which was released in 2020. And we're encouraging you to purchase that book from Miss Dalloway's bookstore, Literary and Garden Arts, and proceeds will help benefit the Ella Baker Center today. So, Zach, it's all you, my friend.
Thank you so
going away.
Thank you so much, Anissa. I really appreciate it. I waited to the last possible moment to come off of onto video. I'm kind of a naturally shy person, especially when folks are reading the bio. So really just appreciate the San Francisco Public Library for the stances that you are taking, for the land acknowledgement with which you started. It is incredibly important to recognize on whose land we stand, and to recognize a long history of racial injustice in this country. And we try to do that at the Ella Baker Center. I am the executive director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. We are named after Ella Baker, who was a brilliant Black woman, a leader in decades of struggle for freedom in this country, for Black folks, for people of all hues, genders, races, sexual orientations. She believed in the power of everyday people to make change, and we try to build on her legacy by advancing what we call a books not bars, jobs not jails, healthcare and housing not handcuffs agenda. So yes, we believe in alliteration as well as in justice. I am really excited to be able to talk with you about this book, but I'm also really cognizant of the situation in which I'm talking with you. So I am in large part speaking to my computer, right? Because we are all on Zoom, and we are finding ourselves in a situation this year that that has been difficult. And I want to talk through some of the indicators of the despair and of where we are. Nurses forced to wear garbage bags to protect themselves because they don't have the adequate personal protective equipment. Meanwhile, police officers outfitted in some of the most expensive body armor you could find. Surging domestic violence, as you mentioned, in terms of people being forced in homes, women and gender nonconforming folks particularly impacted by higher rates of domestic violence. People feeling like they don't have the capacity to support themselves and their families. 45.7 million unemployment claims. Meanwhile, the wealthiest 1% continue to post record profits. COVID deaths twice as high among people of color. Um, Literally, the sacrifice demanded, as you talked about, of essential workers, predominantly women of color, 30 to 40 million people at risk of eviction. The murders of Black people this year alone: Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, fires that light up the skies and sometimes cloud the skies, as we've seen here in the Bay Area. The forced sterilization of immigrant women in ICE detention centers. Now, what I need folks to know, and I know, you know, if we're starting with a land acknowledgement, we are in recognition of this, but I want to just say that this is not an aberration. This is a culmination. Unfortunately, the dangers we face today are undeniably the result of choices made over 400 plus years by politicians on both sides of the aisle and the interests that fund them. And I call these choices collectively a framework of fear that scapegoats Black, Indigenous, other people of color, women, while obscuring the real harms from climate change to inequality to ongoing state violence. And I know this is also a book talk. And so I want to get to talking more specifically about this book, and also just recognize that, you know, as my mama said, if you're going to do a book talk, you should read the book at some point during the book talk. And this being the library, I was telling Anissa just, you know, how amazed I was the first time I saw my book in library form with the with the barcode and the whole deal. I worked in a library, and so this is a special moment for me. And I want to read from the book and read a passage that I think is indicative of the framework of fear. So if you'll bear with me, the title of the passage is 1823 Month Unknown. And if you have the book from the library or your own copy, I'm on page 46. A 7-year-old boy stood on the auction block in Richmond, Virginia. His mother was in the crowd begging her master not to sell her son, but the boy would fetch a good price. Slaveholders from the Deep South were more desperate for slaves since the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade in 1808, and since the cotton gin invented in 1794 had allowed the production of cotton to really take off. The prices of enslaved African people had risen. In this period, 1 in every 10 enslaved persons was relocated from the states of the Upper South to the Lower South. They were sold down the river into brutally hard labor in the Deep South with no means of staying connected to the families and communities they had known. Slightly over half of them experienced major family separations, meaning children were separated from their parents or spouses were separated from each other. The little boy was at the cusp of his years of highest output too, the ages from 8 to 15 years according to popular wisdom among slaveholders. Children in these sought-after ages were often bought alone on the auction blocks. Enslaved people were lined up by height, making it even more likely that children would be separated from their parents. The buyers examined the little boy as though he were livestock, pulling his mouth open to see his teeth, pinching his arms and legs to find out how muscular they were, walking him up and down to detect any lameness, making him bend and stoop. In the end, he was sold to another slave master in Mississippi. His mother followed him to the wharf where he was put on a ship. When the ship launched into the water, his mother was left standing on the wharf crying. She never saw him again. The boy's name was Joseph Norris. He was my grandfather's grandfather. I'll read you a paragraph from the beginning of the next section. The myth of the bad guy. These are unrelated yet connected stories. To scapegoat an entire group of people, making them the source of all evil, is to disregard their humanity. And as the United States grew from 13 colonies to 50 states, this scapegoating made it easier to justify taking the land and lives of indigenous people and the lives and labor of Black people. There is a long and tragic through line, a trail of tears, a legacy of trauma from stories like my family's to the immigrant families being demonized today in the name of public safety, to protect our jobs, our wealth, to protect our way of life, to keep our homes and families safe. America has been engineering and expanding a model of systematic scapegoating for the last 200 plus years. And so when I say, that the events that we're experiencing this year are not an aberration, but a culmination, I am talking about that history. I'm also talking about not just the last 400 years, but really the last 40 years, where we have seen that 53 cents of every federal dollar goes to the military, that in states like California, we have built 23 new prisons and just 1 new university from 1980 to 2000. We see the lion's share of resources go to police departments. We see counties, even here in the Bay Area, one of the most influential political figures is the sheriff's department. Their department has been responsible for dozens of deaths in the last 5 years. The Alameda County Sheriff's Department actually rents jail beds to other counties. They have retweeted the alt-right messages their office has. They hosted the Oath Keepers, one of these alt-right formations. So I think we have a tendency to think that this is something that impacts the rest of the country, but it hits home right here in the Bay Area as well. And so what I want you all to know is that we can transform this reality, that we can move to a different dynamic in this country. And it starts with recognizing what are the lies and what are the truth. So at the Ella Baker Center, we talk about the need for truth and reinvestment. So that means reckoning with a long history of racial injustice in this country. That's the truth of it. And then reinvesting resources back into the communities that have been hardest hit by genocide, by the largest prison building boom in human history, in the form of books, not bars, jobs, not jails, healthcare and housing, not handcuffs. And we've had some tremendous victories in our 25-year history, which I'll come to. But it also means not just recognizing the truth, but also being able to recognize the lie, right? And I often laugh because people ask, well, how many lies has this president told, right? And the reality is that he tells a lot of lies, but I think all of the variations of the lie really in some way boil down to one lie. And that lie is the lie that I call the he keeps us safe lie. The he keeps us safe lie is the lie of abusive people. Abusers often will tell you, don't trust your neighbor. Don't trust your girlfriend. Don't trust your mom. Don't trust the people closest to you. Only trust me. Meanwhile, that person, usually a he, is causing a lot of the abuse, is really trying to prevent others from seeing the harm, and is isolating the person in that abusive relationship. And the president, both in his own personal politics, but also politically, has been telling that lie. He says, don't trust your neighbor around the block. Don't trust those folks in cities. Don't trust your neighbor at the border. Don't trust your neighbor in distant lands, even though those neighbors want the same things fundamentally for their families that we want for ours. Um, and similarly, he is hiding the harms, right? From climate change to inequality to ongoing state violence to racism, and stoking the flame. So not only is he hiding the harms, but he is one of those folks that I call in the book an architect of anxiety. Because the reality is that crime has actually been coming down for the most part over the last few decades. But our anxieties are at sky high levels. And that is because our criminal court system does not address and in fact serves the ends of also hiding the harms that are all around us, right? So the criminal court system tends to focus on crime in the streets rather than crime in the suites of power, crime on the corner rather than crime in the corner offices, right? And because of that dynamic, it serves a sort of normalizing function of allowing harms all around us to go unaddressed. And so at the Ella Baker Center, we talk about needing public health solutions for public health issues. So we say, you know, drug use and abuse should be dealt with as a public health challenge. School discipline, violence itself can be dealt with as a public health challenge. All of these things we think have uh, roots that we can address uh, first and foremost and really transform those dynamics rather than what the criminal court system does, which is adds damage to damage. So one of the fundamental premises of this book is that the way in which we understand safety in our hearts, in our bodies, in our communities is different than the way in which public safety is structured. So if I asked you to take a moment, and I'll ask you just to take a moment to take a breath, because what I've said is a lot. And so I'm going to ask folks to just take a breath in and to let it out. We'll do it one more time and we'll hold in the middle. We're going to take a breath in. And if I asked you to take a moment to think of a time when you felt truly safe, and we're in a different scenario, so I'm not going to be able to really call on folks in the same way, but I will call up the wisdom of some of the folks that I've talked to in the same room before. And when I've asked people this question, a lot of times people say, you know, I thought of a time when I felt safe when I was in my faith community and we were collectively together. I thought of a time when I was with my family, be they biological or chosen. I thought of a time when I was with my partner. I often think of a time or even just the way in which my grandmother held my hands. So she had this way of holding my hands. It was like a two-hand hold, right? It wasn't just the one hand, but the other hand was kind of on top of my hand, just kind of gently patting my hand. And it was this wonderful reminder to me that she had my back. She had my back when I was doing well, but she also had my back if I made a mistake. She had a way of reminding me of who my best self was. And I think that is what true accountability is about. And so the book really describes and talks about restorative and transformative justice. It talks about moving resources away from criminalization and towards these public health solutions. And it talks about how do we hold people accountable while still holding them in community. Because if I ask you to think of what immediately pops to mind when you think of criminal court system or when you think of the term public safety, a lot of times people think of prison bars, they think of handcuffs, they think of a physical architecture and infrastructure that actually separates people. And when you separate people who have caused harm, sometimes that may be necessary, but also we should understand that it inhibits accountability, right? It inhibits people being able to really understand the harm that they have caused and then to make amends for it. And so restorative justice is the process by which, on an individual level, at least, and we'll talk about on a broader level, but on an individual level, it's the process by which the person who's caused harm, the person who's been harmed, are sat in a circle. They're surrounded by the people that support them. And basically, a facilitator helps guide a discussion where the person who has caused harm comes to understand the harm that they have caused and has to develop an accountability plan where they are going to make amends to the person they've harmed. And everybody in that circle is a part of that process. Victims report much higher satisfaction rates with restorative justice than going through the traditional criminal court process. And those who have caused harm are much less likely to recidivate or basically get back in trouble again with the law, having gone through a restorative justice process versus the criminal court system. And so that's a win-win for those two folks, but it's also a win in terms of the community because everybody is asking themselves, what could I have done to prevent this harm from happening in the first place? And through that process, people are really developing this kind of community accountability muscle, which I think is absolutely necessary. And we are seeing it necessary in this moment, right? Because it isn't just the folks in the streets, right, who need to be held accountable. It is those folks in the corner offices. It is the folks in the highest offices of the land who need to be held accountable. And as we begin to engage in restorative justice, we're really building our muscle and our capacity to engage in those kinds of difficult conversations and really think about not just who is this individual and what choice did they make, but also what choices did they have, right? What was the economic situation that may have led them to snatch that laptop that now has this person up at night still dealing with and grappling with the harm that was caused to them? And if they have a different understanding of the harm that they have caused, are they in a different scenario or situation economically to do something different? And so that is a little bit about some of the frameworks that I describe in this book in terms of how we can move away from a framework of fear and towards what I describe as a culture of care, which involves restorative justice and transformative justice, but also involves just bringing resources to communities, right? To make sure that people have food, clothes, and shelter, to make sure that people aren't being forced to make um, ridiculous choices, right? I think of people in my own family who are staying with their partners partly because of health insurance, right? They're staying in relationships that maybe are not for them, but they're worried, are they going to have health insurance? And so these are choices that people should not have to be making. We have seen these desperate choices multiply in 2020. and we can move to a different dynamic. So what I want to offer is just some stories. We're at 12:30. I want to offer a couple of stories that I think are indicative of what we're capable of. Because the thing that I need you to know is that the status quo is not making us safe, right? I think that should be clear. From the statistics I described, um, from the situation in which we find ourselves. The unfortunate truth is that in order to shift and move away from this status quo, we are going to have to take risks. And we are going to have to do things that get us out of our comfort zone. We are in a moment of really in many ways tremendous isolation, of rising white supremacy. And yet, I know that each and every one of us is capable of taking those risks. Now, you might ask yourself, well, how would he know that all of us are capable of taking those risks? And the reason why is because I am a scaredy cat person, y'all. I am a toe the line, stay within my confines person. Um, when I was in eighth grade, I won like all of the awards. I was the teacher's pet. Eighth grade was like 1992 for me. Um, and I had, a big high top fade. My mortarboard thing barely fit over, my graduation cap. I was really just trying not to be noticed at all, but they kept calling me up for the math award, the science award, and each time I would go up, get the award, go and try to hide again at my seat, and they kept calling me up. So, I didn't think about it then, but it was like Oscars so white, eighth grade graduation, so Zach, right? Like, and I was the lightest skinned kid in my classroom, all predominantly African American classroom. I didn't think about the racial disparities. I didn't think about the injustice. Those are things that I think about now. I know that not just across races, but also among races, the lighter your skin is in a courtroom, the lighter your sentence is likely to be, right? So I was just kind of trailing along. That's how I found myself at Harvard, not necessarily so desire, it wasn't a lifelong dream to go to that institution. It was just like the highest on the list. You'd be crazy not to go. So there I was, right? And that's when I started to notice just how differently young people were treated, often for doing some of the same things, right? And these racial disparities, class disparities were very apparent to me. And that led me to an interest in social justice. I found myself at the Ella Baker Center as a first year law school student intern. And we were engaged in a campaign to defeat what would have been the largest per capita juvenile hall in the country from being built. And during the summer, I had done all the things that interns do. But, at the end of the summer, it was clear that we weren't winning this campaign. And the question on the table was, who is willing to do a civil disobedience in order to stop this vote from moving forward? Because the Board of Supervisors was going to vote and move forward this initiative to build what would have been the biggest juvenile hall effectively in the country. And I started to see other people's hands go up. Like I'm down to take a rest and be a part of this civil disobedience. And I don't know if it was the follower in me or what, but I started to feel my hand almost against my will, like started to come up. And I'm looking at my hand like, what's happening? But I found myself volunteered, and I had volunteered, and a week later, I'm at this Board of Supervisor meeting. We are all lined up next to the banister that separates, the folks on high, the Board of Supervisors who make the decision from the people in the cheap seats. And we wanted to cross that banister to say, basically, you can't do this. You can't move forward with basically banking on the incarceration of young people. And so somehow I had managed to get right next to this wooden gate, and then we were supposed to all pass through this little gate and then sit down. And Van Jones one of the co-founders of the Ella Baker Center, along with Diana Frappier, was doing his Van Jones thing up at the podium speaking. And when he raised his hand like this, that meant that we were supposed to cross through this banister, all sit down and get arrested, right? So, you know, I could see Van, but I couldn't hear him because my heart was beating like 1,000 miles a minute, and I'm looking, and then all of a sudden I see those two fingers go up, but I was kneeled down and my knees were like cemented to the ground, and it was like I was supposed to be doing a sit-in on the other side of the banister, but it was like I was doing a sit-in against the sit-in, right? Because I just wasn't moving. But luckily, more experienced activist Harmony Goldberg, being the first, walked right by me. And as I saw her legs go by me, it like snapped me out of it. I woke up. We all went and sat down. We protested. We chanted. They took us to Santa Rita jail. That was, something that changed my life. It was a night that changed my life, seeing the normalcy of youth incarceration. I expected, having seen a couple episodes of Eyes on the Prize, that you sit in, you protest, the powers that be, they change their mind, and then they vote a different way. That isn't how it happened then. It wasn't what happened in terms of the super jail for youth. They actually decided to move forward with the super jail for youth anyways. And so the end of the summer came. I ended up taking a semester off, and that was really a key pivotal moment for me, because it was stepping off of this education track and really examining what did I want for my life. And we were able to, with some additional capacity from interns, get them to actually stop the plans of building the largest per capita juvenile hall in the country. They downsized the expansion by half. They built it in San Leandro instead of Dublin. This was around the turn of the century. And it was a huge taste of victory. And we ended up building on that victory, fighting for the closure, as Anissa mentioned, of 5 of 8 youth prisons across the state of California. The governor just signed bills to close the last 3 remaining youth prisons in the state of California to bring resources back to local communities. Youth crime has continued to decline during that same period that we have been closing youth prisons. So it is not just a win for human rights in terms of how young people are treated, but also a win for public safety. And I say all of that, and I share that story not because everybody has to take the risk of doing civil disobedience, but because there are a lot of different ways that people can be taking risks in order to move us to a different dynamic. When I did the first book talk for this book, I did it at Restore Oakland. And Restore Oakland is this new initiative that we have developed in the heart of the Fruitvale. We just did an amazing mutual aid event a few days ago in our parking lot, where we passed out bags of groceries, masks, both smoke mask as well as the cloth mask. We engaged folks in our annual event to talk about what safety means to them. We did it all socially distanced, 6 feet apart. It was a beautiful event. And to have that home and that space for that kind of event, to be able to really put forward our vision of community safety in brick and mortar form, is incredibly powerful. But it is also as a result of a lot of people taking risks, people in philanthropy taking risks, because there was no model for Restore Oakland. Everybody has been thinking of punishment and prisons as kind of the physical architecture of communities, of public safety, right? And we said to ourselves, well, in the environmental movement, they have solar panels, and they have permaculture, and they have wind turbines. There are these different things where people can say, oh, the new energy future looks like this. When we have divested from fossil fuels and we have moved to a new dynamic, it'll look like this. And we said to ourselves, we need to visibilize restorative justice. We need to visibilize these amazing solutions. And so that is what Restore Oakland is about. But it wouldn't have happened without a lot of people taking risks. Because when we started, we did the initial projections. We thought it'd be like a $3 million project. And folks said, financial and fundraising consultants said, this project is going to be at least 3 times as much as you are expecting it to be. and it is going to bankrupt the two organizations, the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United and the Ella Baker Center, and you all are going to be bankrupt by the time you finish this project, right? And those fundraising consultants were scary, and they were right. They were right at least half of the way. They were right that it cost a lot more than we anticipated, but because community came together, because architects like Designing Justice and Designing Spaces, Deanna Van Buren, and lawyers and people who knew about new market tax credits, and folks like Naomi Baran, who's an amazing leader and helped lead grassroots fundraising campaigns. All of these different people came together, and we were successfully able to raise $22 million for Restore Oakland to build this new initiative. And to me, it is indicative of really the hunger and the desire that people have to move away from this framework of fear and to adopt a culture of care. And so I want to talk more about the risks that we need to take in this political moment, but I want to do so in the context of a conversation. And so I'm going to pause now and really invite you all to ask questions. And as part of my response, I'm going to be talking about this political moment and some of the risks that we need to be taking now. But just want to thank you all again. Thank you, Anissa. Um, and thank you, San Francisco Public Library. Thank you, Lisa, for holding it down on the back end as well. Really appreciate you all.
I'm going to pop in, and guests, please feel free. You can raise your hand. You can unmute. Let's do it. Let's have a conversation. Zach, thank you. That was really inspirational as well.
Right on.
I know people get shy on the Zoom action too, or sometimes they forget to unmute. Eva.
I'll jump in.
Right.
Hi, my name is Eva Mejia. Thank you so much. I actually ran across your book right around. Well, I'm a big fan of Ella Baker, so that's how I got on your mailing list. And I ran across your book at a time where I did feel like there's so much despair, and the narrative can, everything you mentioned. It's like, okay, I can tune off, and you want to crawl into a hole, right? And I think one of the most amazing things why I'm drawn to your book and your work, and one of the most that I really admire, is your ability to question frameworks, question stories, and offer a different story of hope. And I just would love it if you could share that. That's something I really admire in you, and how you're able to do that. So many of us would want to give up, and how you do that, and how do you do that? Because it feels like a superpower. Being able to not give up and question, and then even come up with a alternative narrative. I just really admire that. So
right on.
Any advice on that would be helpful.
Okay, right on. Thank you, Eva, for your support and just partnership and following the work. And I think, part of it is that we've had some tremendous successes, and I would be lying if I said that I would still be able to be in this work if we hadn't had some successes along the way. And I think I try to keep that in mind and know that the successes don't always come exactly when you expect them. And so I want to give a couple examples. One is with the youth prison campaign. When we started that campaign, people said, you will never close a single youth prison in the state of California. This was at a time when people were calling young people youth super predators, and the vestiges of calling their parents welfare queens were still very present. But I have been amazed and astounded by the power of humanity, by the power of people to hold on to family, right? And I think that, to me, if anything, is the superpower, right? It's the mamas who are lifting up that car with all of their adrenaline because and they didn't know that they could do that. I have seen and am humbled by the power of women of color in particular. And so most of my organizing has been listening. So when I was charged with organizing a statewide network of families of incarcerated youth after I got out of law school. And folks said, you know, we want to shut these youth prisons down. And we were like, I don't know if we can do that. Maybe, maybe not. And they were very clear. And we had the good sense to listen. And legislators closed doors in our faces. They laughed at us, but we kept growing our numbers. We kept being persistent. And then you find a champion here or there. You found like a one legislator like Gloria Romero, who's like, yeah, we want to shut these youth prisons down. Nancy Skinner, who later also picked up the fight. And then what seems impossible starts to shift, and there starts to be a different economic dynamic. There's different things that happen, and little cracks in the armor start to appear. And I'll never forget being, you know, Anissa mentioned the Prop 6 victory. I'll never forget being at a conference and speaking about how terrible Prop 6 was. And then the leadership, a couple of leaders within the California Correction Peace Officers Association coming up to me afterwards and saying, you know, we actually agree with you about Proposition 6. And my mouth, like you would have had to pick it up off the floor, because you know, they have been responsible for pushing so many of these initiatives year after year, but they were seeing, you know, an impact of overcrowding in terms of their own staff safety. They were like, this isn't the way to go. The president, his son had been involved in the criminal court system and had a brush with the law, and he had a different sensibility after that experience. So I think, you know, things happen unexpectedly that start to shift the dynamic. And here in California, we kind of went through, you know, not as bad as Donald Trump, but Pete Wilson was pretty terrible. And that was at that same sort of demographic moment in California history. So I try to bring people back to that, like, hey, it's not the same, but we've been through something like this here in California, and we have come out in a different way, in a different perspective, and things are far from perfect in California. But I do think that there's an opportunity for us to really know that we have it within us to really to shift the dynamic.
Thank you.
Hi, Zach. I'm Maribel, and I was lucky enough to go to the grand opening of your center, and I am actually really impressed that you were able to raise $22 million. And I'm in the Excelsior neighborhood here in San Francisco, and I'm looking to open a restorative center that justice center that houses the formerly incarcerated. And I just wanted to like get your advice. Like, how did you imagine something like this, and then just start getting the community involved? Because sometimes I think it's a little difficult to convince people to support our most vulnerable populations.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And it was really a team effort. It was, you know, Deanna Van Buren at Designing Justice, Designing Spaces had been holding a series of conversations that we were involved in, looking at the infrastructure of incarceration and the criminal court system and the lack thereof in the East Bay. And I'll never forget looking at one of these diagrams with the little bubbles and seeing, hey, we need restorative justice infrastructure, different infrastructures in the Fruitvale, in East Oakland, and to be able to then help build some of that infrastructure has really been a blessing. I don't know if someone had told me it was going to cost that much, I definitely would not have embarked on the project, just to be honest. But I think that what we did was just continue to build out a broader and broader base of support, starting with folks who were concerned as advocates and organizers, but then reaching out to people across backgrounds, within philanthropy, within the construction community, within a number of different communities, to say, here's what we need to do. We held, you know, kind of briefings and things in terms of like, here's what we're up to, here's what we're trying to do, can you be supportive? We started to get, you know, just seed support for developing like a business plan. And then we were able to use that business plan to help kind of spark ideas. I would say getting the visual folks and the architectural folks involved early on so that they can be piquing the interest of people, right, through some of the visuals and other materials, I think is really important. We were able to get new market tax credits, which was a kind of important plank of the funding. And then, we were able to go back to some of the initial donors. So understanding that as you are building out support, like going to the folks and saying, this is what we're trying to do, here's the trajectory, here's what we're asking for, and then being able to come back to some of those same folks. The last thing I'll say is we had some good luck as we were embarking in deciding to do this. There happened to be a donor who gave like $34 million to the city of Oakland. We were able to get $1 million of those dollars, and that started to be like make it a real thing that we were then able to branch out and get other donations that were some were similar in size, many less, but to continue to build the base of funding for the work. I do want to say something about just where we are politically briefly, if that's okay. I want to encourage folks to check out a document called Hold the Line. I want folks to do the census work that Anissa mentioned. I want folks to vote. I want folks to understand that we're in an unprecedented political time, but that we have within us really what we need to defend democracy. And that we have a really important role to play here in California. I think we tend to think of ourselves as a blue state, and that is obviously true. But also, if there is any kind of attempt to thwart the will of the people or to have to not allow every vote to be counted, I think we will all need to be really taking acts of commission and omission, like not showing up, not allowing business as usual, being in the streets or calling our friends. There are a lot of different ways that people can work to defend democracy. From November 13th to about December 14th, there will be state counts of the vote across the country. We could be calling other states to make sure that those electors actually follow the will of the people as they bring those certifications to Congress. We can be really ensuring that all of our faith communities, the folks that we work with, our alumni networks are really taking seriously this idea that we don't work unless democracy works. And until every vote is counted, you can count on us to, not allow business as usual to proceed. And I just want to lift that up because a lot of the work that we do at the Ella Baker Center is important and necessary, and we understand this moment that is coming up in terms of our democracy to be a super important one, and I know everyone is feeling that. And I just want to give folks the understanding that there are things that we can be doing here in the Bay Area as well to help ensure that democracy is respected.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah.
True story. Absolutely. We had a series of voter and how-to election. So that is on our YouTube if you want to find those. Lots of ways to help in there as well. And last call for questions for Zach. I was really struck by the architect of anxiety and just how do we break that down? It's just so huge and strong and
Yeah.
ingrained in everybody. I unfortunately had to go to the San Mateo courthouse, and just everything about it is anxiety, you know, it's just no one there to help you. Those hallways, I mean, the systems are just so strong and so anxiety inducing.
The key to me is breaking the isolation, right? And so when we first started organizing at the youth prisons, the guards would say, like, you can't talk to the person in front of you. And they had these very strict rules that really enforced isolation. And we've seen that right-wing uh, just ideology is fueled by isolation. A lot of the people who are coming to these alt-right and other kinds of formations are people who feel isolated and are finding a community of sorts. And so, you know, I think it's just important for us to, especially during this time of COVID, try to find all the ways that we can be breaking down that isolation. And our political participation is what I think will make the difference. And it's hard because we ourselves feel isolated, right? And so whether it's like, you know, sending that, you know, post to somebody to say, hey, I'm thinking about you, whether it is, you know, reaching back out to your alumni network or folks you haven't been in contact with and saying, hey, I'm concerned about democracy and what's happening. You know, I hadn't been in contact with a lot of the folks that I went to school with for some time, but I'm like, oh, this is a great moment because, you know, all the people I know want to have some semblance of democracy in this country. So how can I be, you know, reaching out to some folks that I haven't been in contact with as much? And I think this is a good opportunity. So I didn't mean to cut you off, Anissa, but I did want to say that.
I think that's perfect. Friends, I think that's a great way to end. And Zach mentioned community. This library community, even though we are isolated and connecting virtually, we are still here for you. And some of these programs, definitely like today's, have a very strong community feel. Our book clubs are like that. Some of our author talks, like today's, are very intimate. And, you know, it's connect with us. We miss you. We love you. Zach, we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Friends in the audience and on YouTube, this will be available on YouTube. And I'll send out a follow-up email that has links to the document. And I'm going to put a link to all of our social justice and jail and reentry services links that we keep on file. And Zach, again, we appreciate you being here and all your hard work and the amazing work you're doing. And yeah.
Right on. Thanks, Anissa. Y'all take care.
All right.